All right. So, over the last couple of days, we have gotten some absolutely tragic updates out of Gaza amid Israel's ongoing bombing and invasion, including the targeted and intentional killing of journalists, of poets, of academics, of medical personnel, etc., etc. And today I just want to focus on one specific poet who was assassinated, and I think that's the right word to use here, by the Israeli military. So we're going to touch on him here in a second. But just real quick, to show you some of the latest casualty numbers here from Euromed Monitor, we have now passed 24,000 killed in Gaza in just a couple of months here. 9,420 of them being children, 4,910 of them being women, and out of this 24,142, they say that 22,420 of them, the overwhelming majority, it's like 90%, have been civilians. And then the other number here that I wanted to focus on is 81 killed journalists, okay? Many of these journalists were not those who were just happened to be in the wrong place at the wrong time. Many of these journalists, as I'm going to break it down in this video, have been explicitly and again intentionally targeted by the government of Israel. So here I want to touch on this. Israeli strike on Refaat al-Arir, apparently deliberate. Here from Euromed Monitor. So they say the Israeli airstrike that killed Professor Refaat al-Arir was apparently deliberate, Euromed Monitor concluded on Friday. The department where Refaat and his family were sheltering was surgically bombed out of the entire building where it's located, according to corroborated eyewitness and family accounts. This came after weeks of death threats that Refaat received online and by phone from Israeli accounts. So this guy was explicitly targeted. The Israeli government didn't like that he was giving a human voice to the Palestinians in Gaza and humanizing them and telling their perspective in a very bright way. And, so they went out and they decided we're going to bomb this guy. Now, as I pointed out here, and I saw these in other places as well, they had been calling him, they had been texting him, they had been reaching out to him through various different avenues to threaten his life. To the point where, like, just before he was killed in one of these airstrikes that they say was surgically targeted at his specific apartment, not even he was killed in a broader airstrike of any given location, his specific apartment was targeted. And just a few days before that, he was in some different location, and he got one of these strange calls that was most likely from an IDF guy or some Israeli military officer that was threatening his life, and so he decided to leave the place that he was. He didn't want to leave his colleagues in jeopardy if they were potentially going to target him, and then he ended up going home and at some point was targeted and was killed, was assassinated, right? And so I want to show you guys some of the interviews that he's been doing, some of the poems that he has been writing over the last couple of months and years, just to give you a bit of a perspective on his voice. So here was a recent segment that he did, which is very bleak, honestly, giving a perspective of what it's like living on the ground amid this Israeli siege.
We know that it's very bleak, it's very dark. There's no way out. If there's no water, there is no way out of Gaza. What should we do? Like, drown? Like, commit mass suicide? Is this what Israel wants? And we're not going to do that. And I was telling some friend the other day that I'm an academic. Probably the toughest thing I have at home is an expo marker. But if the Israelis invade, if they barge at us, charge at us, open door to door to massacre us, I'm going to use that marker, throw it at the Israeli soldiers, even if that is the last thing that I would be able to do. And this is the feeling of everybody. We are helpless. We have nothing to lose.
So, I mean, again, obviously, as bleak as it can possibly get in terms of his personal testimony on what it's like being on the ground amid all of this. And you can literally hear at the end of that clip an Israeli airstrike just directly in the background. Okay, so that was just a little clip that he did. I also wanted to show you guys one of his famous poems that was going around. This one he personally posted on his own personal Twitter on November 1st, 2023. So this is just about a month ago, okay? And he said this: "If I must die, you must live. To tell my story, to sell my things, to buy a piece of cloth and some strings, make it white with a long tail, so that a child somewhere in Gaza, while looking heaven in the eye, awaiting his dad who left in a blaze, and bid no one farewell, not even to his flesh, not even to himself, sees the kite, my kite that you made, flying up above, and thinks for a moment an angel is there, bringing back love. If I must die, let it bring hope, let it be a tale. So, obviously an incredibly important voice here that was unfortunately lost. He's not the only one that has been, either a professor or a poet or, a cultural figure or a journalist. I mean, there have been so many other stories as well. But this one in particular, hits. I mean, this is one of the main guys that I've been listening to over the last couple of months and getting his perspective on everything that's going on. And I want to make something clear, yes, it looks like, 100% that he was explicitly targeted by the government, the military of Israel during this. But I want to make it clear, the purpose of that, the purpose of targeting journalists, the purpose of targeting somebody like this, Refaat, is so that the people of Gaza do not have a voice, so that the people who they look up to, the people who have been instrumental in the lives of countless people throughout, their own lives, in developing them, in informing people, in doing art like this, the purpose is to silence those voices so that the people of Gaza have nobody to speak for them. That is the purpose of this, is to try to demoralize them, to dehumanize them, to prevent any sort of ability for them to look towards the future with any sort of hope. That is the reason why Israel is doing this. And again, it's not the only case that we've had. Here from Reuters. RSF International report, Reuters journalist was killed in Lebanon in a targeted strike. So this was another one, the Reuters journalist that I covered a couple of months ago. There was also this, as pointed out by Austerity is Theft. They kidnapped a journalist at gunpoint, stripped and beat him, and forced him to abandon his 7-year-old daughter. So this was a part of this mass roundup, this mass arresting of Palestinians in Gaza, in the northern portion of Gaza, I believe. And I'm going to cover this entirely in a separate video because there's so much to say about this specific incident in and of itself. But I mean, this was just one of the testimonies, right? Al-Arabi al-Jadid said that it lost contact with its correspondent on Thursday afternoon before his family informed them of his arrest, the New Arab reported. It cited al-Khalut's sister as saying that her brother was forced at gunpoint to leave his disabled 7-year-old daughter, and the men were taken away, stripped and beaten by Israeli forces. So this is the kind of shit that they're doing. Now, again, I'm going to touch on this in more detail in a future video, but Israel essentially went around in, especially the northern portion of Gaza, and just mass arrested a bunch of men who they perceived to be as military age men. And it later came out, they did this whole report, and they said, okay, maybe 10% of these guys had some affiliation tangentially to Hamas, okay? So 9 to 10 of these guys out here were just random civilians, right? Businessmen, local business owners or something, right? There were journalists there, there were UN workers there, there were, a bunch of different people who were part of this group, including journalists, and Israel just went and mass arrested them, stripped them down to where they're in their boxers, basically, almost naked, humiliated them, beat the shit out of them, and then just took these pictures of them, again, in an act of the most depraved form of humiliation that you possibly could imagine, right? And obviously people were making comparisons to Abu Ghraib and some of the pictures that the U.S. was responsible for during the so-called war on terror in places like Iraq and Afghanistan. So, I mean, this was just absolutely disgusting at any level you want to look at it. Now, we also had this here from Stephen Donziger. Israel's Netanyahu government appears to be carrying out targeted assassinations of intellectuals in Gaza to wipe out a new generation of modern Palestinian leadership. Artists, poets, doctors, lawyers, and academics are among the victims. So exactly what I was just saying earlier. It's an intentional campaign. I mean, there's no way around it, right? We also had this here. The moment an Al Jazeera journalist, Momen al-Sharafi, breaks the news that his entire family of 21 members were just killed in an Israeli airstrike in Gaza. The look he gives as he is no longer able to talk is heartbreaking. So let's just go ahead and watch a little bit of this here as he's breaking this news on Al Jazeera.
جميع من كان في المنزل أكثر من 21 فرد كان في المنزل استشهدوا. والدي الأستاذ محمود وأمي أمينة وأيضا أخي الدكتور أيمن وزوجته الدكتورة ختام. ابنه محمد الطالب في كلية الصيدلة، ابنته أمينة الطالبة في كلية الطب، أطفاله الثلاث مريا وفاطمة وحنين وزوجة أخي عمار وأطفاله خالتي أسماء وزوجها المهندس ناجي، ابن أختي المهندس أحمد، خالتي الصغرى صباح وزوجها أبو حسين. والدتي تلقيت منها قبل 2 أو 3 أيام رسالة صوتية تعبر عن اشتياقها وعن دعواتها لي بالسلامة لجميع الزملاء. تقول لنا مشتاقة لي بشكل كبير، خاصة كان يمضي تقريبا 54 يوم على الحرب، ما يقارب شهر أو أكثر من شهر لم أراها أبدا، لم أسمع صوتها. هي الرسالة الوحيدة التي وصلتني عبر واتساب. نحن نحرم من دفنهم بكرامة أيضا نتيجة الحصار الإسرائيلي ومنع سكان المنطقة الجنوبية أو من نزحوا من المنطقة الجنوبية مجبرين إلى العودة إلى الشمال لدفن أشقائهم، آبائهم، أمهاتهم، خالاتهم، أقاربهم، أحبائهم.
العوض بسلامتك مرة.
So I mean, again, the narrative that many pro-Israel voices, or that the Israeli government wants people to have in this kind of a moment, is that every single one of these civilians that's being killed is either a member of Hamas, or they're connected to Hamas, or they're Hamas human shields. I mean, it is, I'm not the only person who's made this point, but I find it incredibly disgusting that the only time that you hear Israeli politicians humanizing Palestinians is when they say that they're human shields. And it's true. It's a true observation, right? I mean, these people are not Hamas militants who are trying to terrorize Israelis or something like that. This is just some guy's family. 21 members of a family. And you listen to all of the different occupations, right? People who are aspiring or were already engineers and nurses and doctors and teachers and all of that. All of that life, all of that future potential for all of these people, these children that are being killed, just snuffed out in an instance because Israel does not consider those lives to be valuable. I mean, that's what it comes down to at the end of the day. And this isn't just like my opinion or my assessment of it. I mean, you can go and you can read how Israel does these airstrikes, right? I broke it down in one of those 972 plus magazine reports that came out on the AI mass death factory, essentially, that Israel is operating with right now. And basically their calculation is like, if there's one guy who we think is probably or most likely a Hamas militant, even if he's like on the lowest rung of the totem pole you could possibly imagine, right? Just some random Hamas militant, and he's sleeping at home with his family in an apartment building, then they think it's relatively justifiable to just flatten the entire apartment building and kill everybody inside of it, right? To get that one low-level guy. That's the kind of calculations that they are making. And don't get me wrong, they haven't even provided any substantive, evidence that any of the places that they are striking, these hospitals, the mosques, the churches, the schools, the refugee camps, all of the above, they don't even provide evidence that there was any Hamas militant there, or that there was any Hamas, weaponry there or infrastructure there. They just expect people to believe them at face value. And it's pretty hard to fucking do that when you have testimony from guys like this who have their entire family wiped out in an instant by an airstrike. This guy is not Hamas. His family was not Hamas. They're just random civilians. And that's how you end up with the casualty numbers that I touched on at the beginning of this video, where it's like 24,000 people have been killed, 22,000 of them, right, have been civilians. Out of 24,000, 22,000 have been civilians. That's not a targeted operation against Hamas. It is the exact opposite of that. I've seen other reports recently comparing the civilian ratio, okay, the deaths of civilians in Gaza versus previous wars throughout history. And this has a higher ratio of civilian to combatant deaths than anything essentially in the entirety of the 20th century. In the 20th century, that had World War I, World War II, the Korean War, the Vietnam War, this is worse. It is worse in the proportion of men, women, and children that are innocent civilians who are being slaughtered in mass. Okay, I brought up the other numbers comparing it to Ukraine. We had all of these U.S. politicians who came out and they said Russia, Putin, a violent war criminal. He should be tried for his war crimes. He's using all of these different, weapons like white phosphorus, which Israel is also using, that the U.S. gave them, by the way. But, he's doing all of these different things that constitute war crimes. He is a war criminal. He is violent. He is barbaric, right? And then you go and you look at the data, okay, and you compare the rhetoric, and it turns out, Russia, which I agree, Putin is a war criminal, but Russia has killed roughly like 500 to 1,000 kids in Ukraine in a year and a half or more of warfare, okay? And Israel has killed now over 9,000 kids, okay? At least 10 times the amount. in a tiny fraction of the amount of time that this war has been going on. We're only 2 months into this, okay? And that's how many people that they have killed. I mean, it is incomprehensible the amount of death and destruction that has taken place. We also had this one from a couple weeks back, the loss of Wael Dadu's family to an Israeli bomb. As the Al Jazeera Arabic Gaza correspondent delivered a live news report, he received a call that he had always dreaded. So this guy's family, I mean, this is one of the chief correspondents in Gaza for Al Jazeera. His whole family was killed, right, in a similar airstrike. Meanwhile, we have this is pointed out here by Adam Johnson. Now, I think this is also important because I've seen this floating around in a couple of different articles. You see language like this that just seems so absurd and ridiculous at face value. They say, so far, there is no indication that the United States considers either Israel or Ukraine to be in violation of American policy. There's no indication, as pointed out here by Adam Johnson, that Israel is in violation of American policy or international law because the American government is not looking for war crimes. They're going out of their way to not even begin to touch on this, right? He says this on the same day that this editorial came out, that the Biden administration is expressly not reviewing anything that Israel does to see if it violates international law. Okay, so again, the reason there's no indication of a violation of international law, you would have to be entirely blind. You would have to be intentionally not looking at the violations of international law, the collective punishment of the entire population of Gaza, okay, from the outset of this war, right? Since October 7th, a total complete siege, cutting off food, water, medical supplies, fuel, all of that, that is collective punishment of the Palestinian people, okay? The indiscriminate bombing of civilians, okay? The targeting of health personnel, the targeting of journalists, the targeting of innocent men, women, and children. All of these are war crimes, brazen war crimes, obviously. You know, the telling of over 1 million human beings that they have to flee a certain area under the threat of violence, that is ethnic cleansing. That is a crime against humanity. That is mass forced displacement, okay? There's been nothing. There's been not a single day throughout this entire Israeli offensive that has been following in accordance with international law. So the idea that this is what the U.S. government is doing, I mean, we're 100% complicit, right? Not only are we giving them diplomatic cover, we're sending them the fucking weapons that they're using in Gaza right now. We also have shit like this. The United States, at the United Nations, okay, vetoed a ceasefire resolution in Gaza. Okay, and this was one of their justifications. There were a couple of them that they gave that were all equally as absurd and ridiculous at face value. We do not support an immediate ceasefire in Gaza because Hamas does not endorse the two-state solution. This was according to the Deputy Ambassador to the United Nations from the U.S. We do not support an immediate ceasefire because Hamas does not endorse a two-state solution. Let me tell you something, guys. Hamas is closer to supporting a two-state solution than the government of Israel is under Benjamin Netanyahu. Okay, Netanyahu explicitly, and I covered this months ago at this point on this channel, has explicitly admitted in previous statements that his goal, his security goal for Gaza, was to prop up Hamas, to facilitate money to Hamas, cover for Hamas, to remain in power, because having Hamas in power was a convenient cudgel for him to turn around and say, I have no partner for peace, and therefore we can help to prevent a two-state solution. Benjamin Netanyahu doesn't even accept the weakened and complicit Palestinian Authority under Mahmoud Abbas to be a partner for peace. There is no world in which the government of Israel is in support of a two-state solution. They do not support it. They are taking active steps against the possibility of a two-state solution. What do people think the expansion of illegal Israeli settlements into West Bank territory is supposed to do? It is supposed to ethnically cleanse the Palestinians from the West Bank so that Israel can take that land and those resources under their own authority. To displace the Palestinians is the goal there, okay? That is a direct contradiction to the idea of having a stable two-state solution. You cannot continuously be stealing the other group's land and violently displacing them from their land as you are somehow, magically working towards a two-state solution with that group. It is patently absurd. The government of Israel, no matter how deluded Joe Biden wants to pretend to be, does not support a two-state solution 100%. So this was also just, a disgusting stain on the United States, a stain on humanity, a stain on the Biden administration, to put it lightly. And I'm going to finish off with this here again. Biden under scrutiny after bypassing Congress to supply tank shells to Israel. So there was like a state of emergency that was declared by the Biden administration? Was it for the innocent Palestinian civilians in Gaza? No, it was because Israel was running low on tank shells. Okay? So the Biden administration declared that an emergency and facilitated the transfer of thousands and thousands of tank shells that Israel can then go and use to blow up Palestinian houses in Gaza. Okay? So this is the U.S. government for you, right? We're vetoing UN resolutions. We're continuing to give them diplomatic cover. We are continuing to insist somehow that they are not intentionally targeting civilians, even though over 90% of the casualties have been civilians, innocent men, women, and children. I mean, women and children make up a majority of those killed, right? Oh, but that's all Hamas human shields. Okay. Whatever makes you sleep at night, right? And we're continuing to facilitate the weapons transfers to Israel. I mean, all of this is just so beyond the pale. I didn't think I would see this happen in my lifetime, but this is certainly going to be a hopefully at least is going to be a significant issue for the Biden administration going forward. And I guess all that you can hope for is that the protests, the phone calls, the online campaigns, the in-person rallies, everything that people have been doing to try to raise attention to this, to try to protest against this, that eventually it's going to become so overwhelming that maybe the bloodshed is able to be stopped.
Everyone is saying good Politic guy has the best Politic. Believe me, no one does it like him. Believe me, everyone is saying